Title: The House on Maple Lane. Submitted on March 12, 2024 to r/no sleep. Username: Haunted Writer. Hey there, no sleep. Buckle up because I've got a story for you that will chill you to the bone. It started a couple months ago when my wife Sarah and I decided it was time to buy our first house. We were so excited to finally have a place to call our own after years of renting cramped apartments. We found this beautiful old Victorian-style house in a quiet neighborhood on Maple Lane that was going for an absolute steal. As soon as we pulled up to the looming 3-story facade, I knew we had to have it. Sarah was a little more hesitant, saying the place had an odd vibe to it, but I just chalked that up to the house's age and size. Nothing could have prepared me for the disturbing experience of living at 56 Maple Lane. The first couple weeks after moving in were fairly normal, aside from the occasionally creaking floors and the chill you'd expect from an older home. But it didn't take long for things to get weird. It started small. We'd hear faint noises like footsteps or something scraping along the walls when we knew we were alone in the house. Doors would open and close by themselves, which I tried to rationalize as old homes just settling. But it quickly escalated. One night, I went down to the kitchen around 3 a.m. to grab a glass of water. As I turned on the light, I could have sworn I saw a dark figure scramble past the entranceway into the living room. My heart pounded as I hurried over, only to find nothing out of the ordinary. From then on, I started noticing other unsettling things happening with increasing frequency. Cupboard doors would be wide open when I knew Sarah and I had closed them. I'd find household objects moved to different rooms and in oddly conspicuous locations, as if someone was trying to mess with us. Things took an even darker turn when Sarah discovered a thick, red liquid pooled on the floor in the upstairs hallway one morning. She shrieked out for me and I came running, terrified it might be blood, only to realize it had a metallic scent, like rust. There were no apparent sources it could have leaked from. We cleaned it up, but the reddish-brown stains remained, permanently staining the hardwood floor. Last week was when the shit really hit the fan, though. I wish I could forget the bone-chilling events that transpired, but they're seared into my mind. I'll never be able to unsee what I witnessed. Sarah had been downstairs making dinner while I was up in the spare bedroom working on some layouts for a client's website. All of a sudden, I heard an earth-shattering scream from the kitchen. A scream so blood-curdling and filled with sheer terror that it made my entire body go rigid. I bounded down the steps, my heart pounding out of my chest, only to find the kitchen empty and undisturbed, except for a smear of deep crimson along the wall near the counter. That's when I noticed the drops of blood leading out of the kitchen towards the basement door. At this point, I was in full-blown panic mode. I scrambled towards the basement steps, fumbling for the light switch with trembling hands. As the single harsh bulb flickered on, all I could make out at first was a shadowy figure huddled at the base of the staircase. Then I saw her, my beautiful wife, Sarah, curled up in a pool of her own blood, shaking and whimpering like a terrified child. She was covered in ghastly lacerations, and her clothes were shredded to ribbons. I crumbled to the floor beside her, cradling her in my arms as she repeated the same phrase over and over through choked sobs. "It wants us dead. I don't know what the hell is going on in this nightmare house, but we're getting out of here tonight. I've got Sarah packed up, and we're leaving to stay at a hotel. I don't care if I lose every penny spent on this place. Nothing is worth our lives. Pray for us. I'll keep you updated. This malicious force, whatever it is, seems dead set on tormenting us and won't let go without a fight. I'm scared shitless and have no idea what we've gotten ourselves into. Update 1 to follow." Update 1. Submitted 3 days later. Fuck you guys. I should have listened to all your warnings in the comments to just get the hell out of that house on Maple Lane. I'm at a total loss and can barely process the depraved events of the last 72 hours. After Sarah's horrific attack in the basement, we booked it out of there as fast as we could and checked into a cheap motel on the other side of town. We were both an absolute mess. Sarah was trembling uncontrollably and looked like a freaking ghost, her face pale and drawn from the trauma. I tried my best to tend to her lacerations, but she kept muttering incoherently about feeling it watching and the darkness consuming her. I've never seen such utterly raw terror in someone's eyes before. It was like she was somewhere else, trapped in the depths of her own personal hell. That first night at the motel, the chaos only continued to unfold. I woke up around 3 a.m. to Sarah thrashing and screaming bloody murder next to me. I shook her, begging her to wake up, but she just stared right through me with a 1,000-yard stare, her face twisted into an expression of pure anguish. She suddenly bolted upright, letting out a chilling wail that sent shivers exploding down my spine. "It knows where we are," she rasped in a guttural voice that didn't even sound human. "We're never going to escape it." Before I could react, Sarah sprinted towards the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. I pounded my fists raw, screaming her name, but she just cackled demonically in response. When I finally managed to break through, what I witnessed next will haunt me until the day I die. Sarah was bent over the tub in a pool of her own vomit, which wasn't vomit at all, but a thick, chunky, black, tar-like substance that seemed to have an essence darker than the depths of hell itself. The viscous liquid bubbled and oozed out of her, filling the tub in a grotesque, heaving flow of pure malice. She turned towards me with those soulless eyes, her face partially obscured by the reeking black sludge oozing out of every orifice. Her gaze bore right through me as she opened her mouth, tilting her head back as the rancid tar began projectile purging out like one of those depraved horror films. I ran for my life, grabbing whatever clothes and meager possessions I could on my way out of that nightmarish scene. Sarah just kept vomiting and retching in a foul, unending spiral, completely unresponsive to my desperate cries for her to snap out of it. After getting the hell out of that motel room, I've been living in my car for the past 2 days, terrified to make a sound or pull over longer than absolutely necessary. I'm functioning on maybe 3 hours of sleep, burdened by crippling anxiety and paranoia over what kind of deranged force has claimed my wife's soul. Just when I thought the house on Maple Lane was the extent of my turmoil, it becomes clear this insidious haunting has followed us. Whatever malevolent entity we've provoked is relentless in its torment. I've driven around aimlessly, hoping to throw it off my trail, but nowhere feels safe anymore. Last night, I pulled off on a deserted back road to try and get a couple hours of restless shut-eye. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I noticed a thick, black substance coating my rearview mirror, slowly dripping down toward the seats. I nearly wrecked the car, speeding away, running every red light until I made it back to the main roads and the safety of other people around. I don't know what to do anymore. Whatever this is, it's not just a haunting. It's like we've irrevocably pissed off some ancient, depraved demon that won't stop until it's claimed our souls. Maybe it was that house awakening something sinister. Or perhaps we disrupted the resting place of something evil that should have never been disturbed. I've tried calling Sarah's phone hundreds of times, but it goes straight to a crackling voicemail of her making gurgling noises like she's being strangled. I have to find her before this thing has its way. I can feel its vile presence getting stronger by the hour, closing in on me like a thick fog of dread and despair. Maybe going back to where this all started is my only hope of figuring out how the fuck to stop this nightmare. Perhaps the house on Maple Lane holds some answers. Either that, or it's walking straight into the depths of the hellish abyss that's already consumed my wife. I'm not sure anyone will ever read this final account from the depths of sheer hell I've endured, but I have to try and get these words out while I still can, while my fingers can still type through the tremors of unyielding dread overcoming every fiber of my being. It's 4:27 a.m. now, I think. Honestly, I've lost all sense of time and reality over the last day, just an unending spiral into the maw of the darkest, most depraved nightmare fuel humanity has ever borne witness to. I arrived back at the dilapidated Victorian around midnight, leaving my car running outside with the headlights flooding the overgrown lawn. The full moon overhead seemed to take on an eerie, sickly red glow as the clouds passed over it, an ill omen foreshadowing the indescribable horrors that awaited inside those accursed walls. After breaching the front door, I was instantly enveloped in a thick, black miasma that smelled like burning hair and rotted meat. It coiled around my body like a suffocating snake, seeping into every crevice as I gasped for air. My first footsteps echoed through the desolate house as if I'd just crossed the veil into the pitch-black void of death itself. "Sarah." I croaked out in desperation, my voice dripping with dread. The only response was a low, rumbling growl that reverberated through the floorboards, shaking me to my very core. I fumbled for my flashlight with trembling hands as an ungodly, high-pitched ringing began to pierce my eardrums. It felt like the unholy spawn of 1,000 nails being dragged down a chalkboard, mixed with the screams of the eternally damned. I had to find the source. Maybe then I could piece together a way to fight this evil and find my wife. The ringing grew more intense as I made my way up the creaking steps to the second floor, swirls of black fog lapping at my feet. That's when the true defilement of my senses began in earnest. Visions and entities, mere glimpses of the unspeakable terrors pressing in from the other side, began assaulting me at every turn. Tar-covered figures with mouths constantly unraveling into never-ending spirals of fanged maws. Pulsating organic walls composed of viscera and fleshy sinew, oozing with ichors and unnaturally contorting before my very eyes. The hallway seemed to extend onwards, into a black, infinite abyss. Yet the more I traversed, the more the space felt like it was closing in around me, threatening to crush me into oblivion. My flashlight beam hit something ahead, a hunched, humanoid shape curled up at the end of the hall. "Sarah?" I whimpered again as I slowly inched forward. It began rocking back and forth, a low, droning moan echoing all around like the halls themselves were alive and resonating from some ungodly abyssal plane. The figure's head snapped towards me with such violence I could have sworn I heard tendons ripping apart. What I saw turned my blood into icicles and made every neuron in my brain scream out in primal, unfiltered terror. It was Sarah, or what had once been Sarah, her skin now stretched taut over her bones in a horrific rictus grin, shreds of flesh hanging off in ragged chunks. Her once beautiful eyes had been replaced by dripping, tar-black pits of utter emptiness and evil. The lower part of her face bisected into 3 spiraling jaws filled with rows of dagger-like fangs that began gnashing and chomping, spewing flecks of a viscous, corrosive black venom that sizzled on contact with the floor. Her emaciated limbs stretched and distorted into grotesquely elongated forms, whipping around with sickening cracks of bone and sinew. I scrambled backwards, vomiting streams of bile onto the floor as Sarah, no, the thing that had been my wife, began slithering towards me with purpose. The walls, ceiling, floors, every surface began undulating and warping into surreal configurations, folding in on each other in fractal patterns of what I can only describe as eldritch industry. The thing that had once been Sarah opened her spiraling maws impossibly wide, splitting her own face apart, and began contorting her body into inhuman shapes beyond the bounds of biology or physics. That's when I felt it press into me. A part of it physically merged into my very being, pouring through my mouth and every open orifice. I could feel the adjunct appendages and fluids sinking into my organs and nervous system like an obscene violation of my humanity. My vision went double, my senses teetering between this dimension and what felt like an incessant barrage of dread, terror, and infinite hopelessness. I was being unmade, decaying into the inescapable oblivion of pure entropy, while simultaneously ascending into cosmic knowledge that shatters mortal minds into dust. That's when I started putting these words down. A frantic stream of consciousness purge before I become part of the unknowable, undifferentiated oneness of cosmic chaos and suffering beyond description. Sarah's abyssal scream reverberates all around me as I type this, beckoning me to surrender my individuality to the limitless cycle of anguish and corruption. Her twisted, tar-spewing jaws consume me, the words blurring on the screen as I begin to lose my last fragile grasp on what is real. In this final moment, I can feel it all becoming one horrific truth, an eldritch abomination from dimensions outside our own, continuously feeding on itself for eternity in a dizzying, never-ending spiral of fear, revulsion, and the total unraveling of all that is natural in this universe. Perhaps this is hell itself, bleeding through into our reality. Sarah is but the first to be completely unmade and regressed back into its unformed, soulless mass of terror. I can no longer resist the call of the howling void, of the unknowable,